You keep waiting for someone to show up. The call that never comes. The person who was supposed to notice. The support that was supposed to arrive the moment things got hard. And it never does. Not because you did something wrong. Not because you are unworthy of it. It doesn't come because it was never coming. You are alone. Not abandoned. Not unloved. Alone. Maybe it's a parent who never learned how. Maybe it's a partner drowning in their own storm. It doesn't matter which one failed to arrive. The pattern is the same for all of them. And Carl Jung spent his entire life studying what that word actually means. He didn't see it as a wound to fix. He saw it as the doorway every strong person eventually has to walk through. Not because the world is cruel. Because psychological strength was never meant to come from outside of you. The moment you stop confusing, "nobody is helping me," with, "I have been abandoned," something in you shifts. You start building something no one can ever take away again. For most of human history, people didn't survive alone. You needed the tribe to eat, to be protected, to matter. So the nervous system learned something simple. Connection equals survival. Carl Jung called the hidden emotional patterns we inherit from that history part of the shadow, the parts of the self that stay unconscious, running underneath your decisions without you ever agreeing to them. He never said the need for support was weakness. He said it was unconscious. It shows up as resentment when a friend doesn't check in. It shows up as panic when a partner needs space. It shows up as the quiet belief that if you were truly loved, you wouldn't have to do this by yourself. This isn't a modern problem invented by loneliness on social media. It's a structural feature of the human psyche that Jung documented in patients born in the 19th century, in a world with none of today's distractions. The absence of support has always existed. What's new is only how loudly people now announce their disappointment about it. Think of the coworker who expects the office to throw a party for every milestone, and feels quietly bitter when it doesn't happen. That bitterness is old, family-shaped, wearing an office badge. Jung spent decades studying what happens when a person is forced to face themselves without that external scaffolding. He called the process of building an identity that no longer depends on outside validation individuation. Becoming who you actually are, instead of who the group needs you to be. And individuation always starts the same way. It starts with disappointment. It starts with someone not showing up. Not because the universe is testing you. Because the psyche uses absence the way a muscle uses resistance. Without resistance, nothing grows. Without absence, nobody learns to stand on their own legs. Consider the low-grade disappointment at most family gatherings, where everyone quietly waits for someone else to finally fix the dynamic. Nobody does. Not because the family doesn't love each other, but because every person in that room is running the same unconscious script, waiting for someone else to go first. That script is inherited, not chosen, which is exactly why breaking it feels so unfamiliar the first time. This is not a story about isolation. This is a story about what happens the day you stop treating other people's presence as the price of your own stability. Think about the moment you called someone in crisis and they didn't pick up. Think about the year you needed a parent to say, "I'm proud of you," and they said nothing. Think about the relationship where you kept explaining your pain to someone who kept missing it. Each one of those moments felt like evidence that you were unlovable. Jung would say you were reading the wrong signal. Those moments were not verdicts on your worth. They were invitations to build the one thing external support can never give you. An identity that survives contact with silence. Here is the confusion that keeps people stuck for decades. They treat "nobody is helping me" and "I have been abandoned" as the same sentence. They are not. Abandonment is something done to you. Lack of support is often just the ordinary shape of other people's limits. Your mother not knowing how to comfort you is not the same as her rejecting you. Your friend being consumed by their own crisis when you needed them is not the same as them not caring. Jung named the mechanism behind this confusion projection. Taking something that lives inside you and placing it onto someone else so it feels like their fault instead of your unmet need. When you can't tolerate the fact that no one is coming, you start to believe someone should have come. And when they don't, the mind manufactures a story, "I was abandoned." It's a more bearable story than the truth. The truth is quieter and harder. Sometimes there is no one coming, and that has nothing to do with how much you're worth. Consider a woman who spent 15 years believing her mother's coldness meant she was unlovable, only to learn much later that her mother had grown up in a house where affection was treated as dangerous. The coldness was real. The meaning she attached to it was not. Nothing about that discovery erased the pain of growing up under it, but it did dissolve the false verdict she had been carrying for 15 years, that she had done something to deserve it. Consider a man who assumed his best friend's silence during his divorce meant the friendship was fake, only to learn years later that his friend had been in the middle of his own custody battle, unable to hold anyone else's grief at the time. Picture the moment after a breakup when you refresh your phone every 4 minutes, waiting for a text that explains everything. That waiting isn't love. That waiting is the nervous system still looking for the tribe to complete the job your own psyche was supposed to do. Jung would ask a blunt question here. What exactly were you expecting them to give you that you cannot give yourself? Not because self-sufficiency means never needing anyone, because most of what people label support is actually a request for someone else to regulate their fear for them. Here is the quotable version of this. Abandonment is done to you. Dependence is a story you tell about it. The moment you separate those two things, half the pain disappears. Not because the situation changed, but because you stopped adding a false meaning on top of it. You've done this. Everyone has done this. You've turned a friend's bad week into proof that friendship is fake. You've turned a parent's emotional limitations into proof that you were never truly loved. You've turned a partner's silence into proof that you're too much to hold. None of those were abandonment. They were just other people, being exactly as limited as every human being is. But once you stop treating limitation as betrayal, a new question appears, one this video is going to force you to answer. If nobody is coming, and that's simply the truth of most human relationships most of the time, what are you supposed to do with yourself in the meantime? Because before you can answer that honestly, you have to look at the people who didn't show up, and understand what was actually happening on their side of the silence. Every person who has ever disappointed you was carrying something you couldn't see. Not as an excuse. As a fact. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the persona, the mask a person wears to function in the world, built specifically to hide what they cannot afford to show. Most people are so busy managing their own persona that they have almost nothing left to give yours. Your friend who forgot to check on you during the hardest week of your life wasn't cruel. She was drowning in a version of the same exhaustion, just wearing a better mask. Your father who never said, "I'm proud of you," wasn't withholding love as punishment. He likely never received those words either, and you cannot hand someone a language they were never taught. This is not about excusing harm. Some people are cruel, and that's a different conversation entirely. This is about the far more common case. People who are simply too depleted, too unaware, or too wounded themselves to meet you where you are. Here's the uncomfortable math Jung's work points to. The amount of psychological capacity a person has for you is limited by how much capacity they have for themselves. Someone deep in their own unresolved shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to look at, has almost nothing left over to hold space for yours. Consider the sibling who never called during a parent's illness. Years later it surfaces that he was managing his own quiet depression, invisible to everyone, including himself. That doesn't erase the hurt of his absence, but it replaces the wrong story, he didn't care, with the more accurate one, he was barely holding himself together. Think about the coworker who snapped at you the one day you needed patience. You didn't know she just left a doctor's appointment that terrified her. Think about the partner who went quiet right when you needed reassurance. You didn't know he was replaying his own father's silence in his head at that exact moment. Every disappearance you've ever taken personally had a hidden interior you never saw. That doesn't mean you're required to keep waiting for people who consistently show you their limits. It means the story "they didn't show up because I'm not enough" is almost always false. The accurate story is smaller and less dramatic. They didn't show up because they couldn't, not because you didn't deserve it. And once you stop needing an explanation from every person who has ever failed to appear, something happens that surprises most people. You stop performing for an audience that was never fully watching in the first place. This is one of the quiet costs of growing up. Realizing most people are too occupied with their own survival to be the audience you imagined. It isn't a tragedy. It's just accurate. And accuracy, uncomfortable as it is the only thing strong enough to build a life on. But there's a harder question hiding underneath all of this. One that has nothing to do with them anymore and everything to do with what you were doing while you waited. While you were waiting for someone to show up, you were quietly handing them a job. The job of making you feel safe. The job of making you feel like enough. The job of regulating a fear you were born with and never learned to hold yourself. Jung called a wound like this a complex, an emotional pattern from early life that keeps firing automatically, long after the original situation is gone. If you grew up needing someone to rescue you from chaos, your nervous system may still be searching for a rescuer decades later, in every relationship, every job, every friendship. Not because you're broken. Because the complex doesn't check a calendar. It doesn't know the danger past. It keeps looking for the same solution it needed at 7 years old, at 30, at 60. Here is the pattern in plain language. You outsource your own stability to whoever is standing closest. And every time they fail to provide it, because no external person can provide it permanently, the wound reopens, fresh, as if it just happened for the first time. Consider someone who has changed partners 4 times in a decade, always searching for the one who will finally make them feel secure, and always feeling the same emptiness 18 months in, no matter how devoted the partner. Jung would say the problem was never the partner. The problem was asking another person to do a job only their own psyche could finish. Consider the person who feels an actual physical drop in their chest every time a friend takes more than an hour to reply to a text. That drop is not proportionate to a delayed reply. It's a complex reacting to an old, unrelated fear. This is exhausting in a way most people never name out loud. It means your peace of mind is always rented from someone else, and rent is never guaranteed. Jung's answer to this wasn't, stop needing people. His answer was closer to, stop outsourcing the one job that was always yours. The job of telling yourself the truth when no one else will. The job of staying when your own mind wants to run. The job of being the person who shows up for you at 3 a.m., instead of waiting for someone else to answer the phone. Picture the version of you who has never once been taught to do this. That version panics the second silence lasts too long. That version confuses being alone with being unsafe. Now picture a different version, the one Jung spent his life describing. Someone who can sit inside their own fear without needing another person to talk them out of it. Not cold. Not detached. Just no longer renting their peace from someone else's mood, someone else's availability, someone else's capacity to love them correctly. This is the quiet transformation nobody puts on a highlight reel. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like someone finally sitting still in a room by themselves without reaching for a phone. But building that kind of stability has a cost, and most people quit right before they reach it because the cost shows up disguised as something else entirely, stagnation. Here is what happens to the person who keeps waiting instead of building. Nothing collapses right away. That's the trap. Life keeps moving in slow motion. The same job, the same relationship, the same unspoken hope that eventually someone will finally show up correctly. Months pass. Then years. And underneath the patience, something else grows quietly. Resentment. Not loud resentment. The kind that hides inside politeness. The kind that shows up as sarcasm at dinner, as distance in bed, as a smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Jung would say this resentment is unlived life turning against the person carrying it, energy that was supposed to go toward building yourself, redirected instead into quiet blame. You start needing people to fail you in a strange way because their failure justifies why you never built anything of your own. I would have started that business but nobody supported me. I would have left but nobody helped me leave. I would have healed but nobody showed up the way I needed them to. Every one of those sentences sounds like an explanation. Every one of those sentences is actually a cage, built out of borrowed responsibility. Consider the person who has told the exact same story about their unsupportive family for 20 years, word for word, at every dinner party, every therapy session, every late-night conversation. The story hasn't changed because the life underneath it hasn't changed either. The story became a substitute for the life. Stagnation disguised as loyalty. Waiting disguised as patience. And the years that pass while you wait don't come back. This is usually the point where people watching this video feel something tighten in their chest. Recognition, maybe irritation. If that's happening right now, that reaction is worth paying attention to, not pushing away. If any part of this is landing, that's usually the moment to hit like and stay with it instead of scrolling past. The recognition is doing something the scrolling won't. Because the alternative to stagnation isn't harsh independence. It's smaller than that and far less dramatic than people expect. It's just deciding, quietly, that your stability is no longer a request you send out into the world and wait on. It's a practice you run yourself, whether anyone answers or not. Jung spent the second half of his own life studying what he called the second half of life. The period when a person stops building an identity to be accepted by others and starts building one to actually be themselves. He noticed something almost universal in his patients. The ones who suffered longest were the ones still trying to get the first half of life to finally work, waiting for approval that was never coming, waiting for a parent, a partner, a whole family system to finally deliver what it was never built to give. The ones who healed were the ones who stopped renegotiating with people who had already shown, repeatedly, what they were capable of. This is individuation in plain terms. Becoming a complete person by drawing authority from inside yourself instead of importing it from outside. Not arrogance. Authority. The difference matters. Arrogance needs an audience. Authority doesn't. Someone who has done this internal work can walk into an empty room and still feel like somebody is home. They can face a bad diagnosis, a divorce, a financial collapse, and instead of collapsing into, "Why isn't anyone helping me?" they ask a different question, "What am I going to do about this?" That single shift in the question changes everything downstream. Jung didn't reach this understanding early in his career. He reached it after his own dark period in midlife, a stretch he later called a confrontation with the unconscious, years where he had almost no external validation and had to build meaning from the inside, using dreams, images, and symbols instead of applause. He came out of that period with the theory that would define the rest of his work, that the psyche naturally moves a person toward wholeness, but only if they stop outsourcing the job to someone else. Consider the retiree who spent 40 years building a career around a boss's approval, and who finally, at 63, stops asking their adult children for permission on every decision they make. Neighbors call it stubbornness. Jung would call it the first real freedom of that person's life. Consider the widow who spent 30 years asking her husband to make every financial decision, and who discovers at 71 that she is capable of managing her own accounts, her own choices, her own days. She discovered it decades later than she needed to, but she discovered it all the same. This is why so many people over 50 describe a strange late-life clarity, not because life got easier but because they finally stopped waiting for permission to be solid. That clarity was always available. It just required letting go of one belief. That stability has to be handed to you by someone who loves you correctly. It doesn't. It has to be built, slowly, in the exact silence you were so afraid of. And once that authority is built, it changes something specific about how a person moves through their actual, everyday life. Here is what this looks like on an ordinary Tuesday, not a highlight reel. Someone doesn't text back for 3 days. The old version of you checks your phone 11 times, rehearses accusations, spirals into, "What did I do wrong?" The version built on internal authority notices the silence, feels a flicker of discomfort, and keeps working, keeps living, keeps eating dinner without narrating a crisis to themselves. Not because they don't care. Because their sense of okayness is no longer stored inside someone else's phone. A decision needs to be made, a job change, a move, an ending. The old version waits for someone to confirm it's the right choice. The new version consults people they trust, then makes the decision anyway because outsourcing the decision was always a way of outsourcing the responsibility if it goes wrong. A hard week hits, grief, illness, a financial hit. The old version treats the absence of rescue as proof of being unloved. The new version treats the absence of rescue as ordinary and gets up anyway. This is not about becoming unreachable. People who've done this work still call their friends. They still cry. They still ask for help when they need it. The difference is that asking becomes a request, not a requirement. A request can be denied without destroying you. A requirement, when unmet, feels like the floor disappearing. That's the entire shift. Consider the parent who used to need their adult child's daily check-in to feel like a good parent, and who learns instead to measure the relationship by its quality, not its frequency. Consider what happens the next time a friend cancels plans last minute. The old response spirals into a story about being unwanted. The new response simply rearranges the evening and notices, almost with surprise, that the disappointment passes in minutes instead of days. Jung's word for the end point of this process was the self. Not the ego, not the persona, but the deeper center of a person that exists whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not anyone shows up, whether or not anyone ever fully understands them. Most people spend their whole lives building a life around other people's presence. A much smaller number build a life around their own presence, and let other people's presence be a gift on top of it, instead of the foundation underneath it. That second life is quieter. It is also, according to everyone who has actually lived it, the only version that doesn't collapse the moment someone leaves the room. But there's a moment almost everyone who does this work eventually faces. The moment the theory stops being theory. Picture the exact night this usually happens. A diagnosis comes back worse than expected, and the person you called first doesn't pick up. Or the marriage finally ends, and the family member you thought would drop everything says they're too busy this week. Or the business fails, the savings disappear, and the friends who promised to always be there go quiet exactly when it matters most. Maybe it's simpler than any of that. Maybe it's just an ordinary Tuesday when you needed one person to ask if you were okay and nobody did. This is the night the old belief system either breaks a person or breaks open for them. For years, part of you built an entire identity around the idea that if things got bad enough, someone would finally step up. And on this specific night, nobody does. Not because you weren't worth it, because that was never how it was going to work, and some part of you has actually known that for a long time. This is usually where people describe feeling something close to free fall, the floor of someone is coming finally giving out completely. Somewhere in that free fall is also a quiet, terrifying question. Has anyone actually been holding me up until now, or was I doing this the entire time without noticing? And in that free fall, underneath the panic, something else is waiting. A version of you that has been quietly practicing this exact moment without realizing it. Every time you sat with discomfort instead of numbing it, every time you made a decision without asking for permission, every time you survived a silence you thought would destroy you. That version doesn't feel rescued. It feels, for the first time, like it doesn't need to be. This is not the moment everything gets easy. It's the moment the floor turns out to have been solid the entire time. It just wasn't underneath anyone else. It was underneath you. You are alone. Say it again and notice it no longer sounds like a verdict. It sounds like a fact about the structure of being human, one that Jung spent his entire career trying to help people stop running from. Not alone as in unloved. Not alone as in unworthy. Alone as in, the center of gravity was always supposed to be inside you, not borrowed from someone standing nearby. This is the part most people skip past too fast. The freedom underneath the aloneness was there before the crisis, waiting to be noticed. You stop waiting for the call that explains everything. You stop needing someone else's presence to prove your own worth. You stop treating other people's limits as a verdict on your value. You start building the one relationship that was always guaranteed to last as long as you do, the one with yourself. Notice that none of this required anyone else to change even slightly. It only required you to stop waiting for them to. This is not coldness. A person who has done this work loves harder, not less, because their love no longer comes from panic. It comes from choice. They don't need you to complete them, so when they choose to stand beside you, it means something entirely different than fear ever could. This is not superiority either. Individuation doesn't make anyone better than the people still waiting for a rescue that isn't coming. It just means they eventually stopped waiting the same way you're about to. Somewhere tonight, someone is refreshing their phone, waiting for a text that will never arrive the way they need it to. That used to be you. It doesn't have to be you anymore. Not because the people around you changed. Because you stopped handing them a job that was always yours. Unshaken isn't a personality trait. It's a decision made quietly, usually in a room by yourself, on a night nobody else even knows mattered. If this reached something real in you tonight, put the word unshaken in the comments below. Not for attention. For the version of you that needed to read it from someone who has already lived on the other side of that silence. You are alone. And for the first time, that sentence isn't the end of the story. It's where it finally begins.